Let me introduce myself. I'm Maria Marshall. I am the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. That is hosted at Purdue University. I think I always forget to say that. And welcome everybody to our December webinar. We're very excited to talk about our data set that we'll make available to all of you. And I see some familiar names on the call, so that's great. And some new ones, so it's good. So let me, before I jump on to talk about this webinar, let's see. There we go. Just remind you that we do have a monthly webinar series. So our next webinar for January 25th, will be focused on aging and be brought to us by the North Central Region Aging Network. So that's also a very timely and relevant topic for the nation, but particularly for the North Central region, as we talk about caregiving and our next survey, which will be on caregiving. So kind of a lot of relevant topics here. So I'll go ahead and get started. Remind you that the webinar is being recorded. And so if you want to go back and re-listen to all the wonderful things that we're going to tell you today, that will be available over YouTube as well. Okay. A little bit. There we go. So today our webinar is brought to you by Dr. Zuzana Bednarikova and myself. Zuzana is the Extension and Research Specialist for the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, the NCR-CRD, and the technical person, I'm going to call her, behind the data set. So we had this wonderful idea, and then I said, oh, Zuzana, I think you'll be the one leading this. So she'll be talking about all the technical details that we think are relevant for you to be able to start using the data. And then we'll just start a little bit about, you know, why did we think about having this data set and why do we want to make it available to everyone? Let's see, hopefully this works better. There we go. So just a brief outline, we'll talk about, you know, introduce the NCR-Stat, our baseline data set, give you a little bit of a definition about what our definition for rural and urban that we're going to be using at the NCR-CRD, as you all probably know. So a lot of different definitions. So depending on what you're using, that might that matters, what you're trying to do. Then talk about, you know, sources and methods related to the baseline survey, and then some of the things that we're doing with it and hoping to entice you to use the data set. Okay, so what is NCR-Stat? NCR-Stat, when we proposed to bring the center here to Purdue, one of the things that we proposed was to provide, to collect data for the North Central region that was rural and urban, that everybody could use. My thought process was at the time that, you know, as a research and extension faculty member, something that's more precious to me than money is data. Right, you know, that is something that we can offer of the center that is kind of to me, you know, we're talking about Christmas, the gift that keeps on giving. Versus, you know, we do have the small grants that we're still doing, but I thought, well, this could be a common data set that everybody could use. And so you don't have to go out for grants just to be, even to do something that if you wanted to use this for primary data collection. So that was the thought process behind why we wanted to do the NCR-Stat. So we're collecting, like I said, data on rural and urban households, and emphasizing for this baseline survey, it's kind of baseline, has a little bit of everything: demography, economics, health, housing, community development, environment, and social behavior. So we're trying to give everybody a little bit to hang on to in terms of using this data. And then in the future, we're going to be doing kind of more specific, diving deeper into different topics. So our next survey that we'll be collecting is actually going to be on caregiving, broadly defined. So again, the data set includes this kind of primary economic and social data. It's collected at the state level and focused on households, businesses, and community well-being. Okay, so what's the purpose? I talked a little bit about that. I thought, you know, hey, this is more precious than money to provide data to the land-grant institutions in the North Central region. And so we wanted to really think about issues that are facing rural communities based on our 3 themes of the center, which are creating resilient communities and economies, developing leadership and civic engagement, and promoting community health and wellness. So that's why you see our baseline survey kind of a little bit of everything that touches on these topics. So again, we wanted the NCR-Stat to decrease barriers for institutions, right? So not every institution has all the enough resources to be able to go out, collect data. Getting a grant just to collect data sometimes can be hard and can take a lot of money. And so that was what we were trying to do, is decrease barriers to institutions to study kind of these regional changes. My hope is that the data will open up more collaborations between research and extension and across institutions, as people might say, think and see common themes across states that they might want to work on together, whether it's on a research paper using their data directly, using the data as kind of this, looking for things that need to be further researched. And again, it's to facilitate this collaboration for additional surveys. We're going to be collecting data every year. If there are topics that you think are relevant, that we should be studying, that are pertinent to the North Central region, that are within our 3 topical areas, we want to hear about it. We want to know what data we should be collecting, what topics we should be focusing on. And you can always apply to be a fellow with the center and lead one of these data collection, lead the development of the survey, as Shoshana Inwood is doing for us for caregiving. So that's always a possibility. I'm always trying to say, hey, come send us proposals for doing things for the center. And okay, so now I'm going to pass it on to Susanna, who's going to talk to us about the nitty-gritty of the survey.
Thank you, Maria. My apologies for a little mess with the slides. I'm really proud to say you some words and some details and information about our data set. As Maria said, it's something very special to have so many primary data. So now this is a great opportunity to give you more information how these data might be available for you. But first, I would like to start with something that is important not only for our center, but I will talk in terms of our center. What is rural? As a rural center, we needed to define or find some definition how to specify rural areas for the purpose of our work and research, and also for the NCR-Stat, because we, as Maria mentioned, we surveyed rural and urban households. So we put together several definitions, one from US Census Bureau and or both from US Census Bureau. One is based on the classical US Census Bureau definition that distinguishes between urban or metro areas and not metro or rural areas. So our rural areas, based on these definitions, are open countryside with population densities of less than 500 people per square mile, but more importantly, places with fewer than 2,500 people. Based on the metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas, we can define non-metro or urban areas as more open areas out of big urban clusters that are less densely populated and have the lower number of inhabitants. And if I go further, you can see that we use the combination of those definitions in our survey, where we asked our respondents 2 questions related to their location. One is very specific. They were asked to check the place where is their household located, and the first 2 answers, rural areas as open as sparsely populated countryside or town of less than 2 or 2,500 inhabitants, are considered as rural. All other answers are considered as urban areas. Respondents also were allowed to self-describe their current residential location, and they chose between urban, suburban, and rural. So you can see the description of urban, suburban, and rural, and it was on the respondents to identify their location. So we believe that they checked the relevant answer because the description is pretty straightforward. So as the next step, after we defined the rural and urban, not only for our NCR-CRD, but also for the NCR-Stat, we had to select topics that we want to include in our survey. It took some time, a lot of discussions and decisions because we didn't want to copy surveys that already exist, and wanted to focus on the questions that are not answered yet, or it's more difficult to answer them, or that are based on, or the data are based on, or there are only secondary data. So we did a lot of research of different topics and surveys and documents, and ended up with 5 main categories. Household demographics that include household and householder characteristics, their location, which means urban and rural, and migration pattern, which is my personal topic, but also very like a timely manner topic, because people move not only internationally or between states, but also there is a community migration or regional migration, that people go back home to their rural communities, or they migrate between urban and rural areas. Then we were looking at creating resilient communities and economies. There are several topics included in this category, like household income. We have a lot of options how the household income is or compiles of. Then we focused on workforce participation, which means employment, unemployment, self-employed, part-time job, and other categories. Entrepreneurship with special focus on family businesses. Then caregiving, which is the topic that our next webinar will be focused on. And in our survey, we focused not only child caregiving, but also adult caregiving. So we have both categories, and this caregiving part is pretty extensive. And also, as Maria mentioned, this will be the topic for our next NCR-Stat survey. Housing, type of homes, housing age, whether the respondent or the household has mortgage, or they rent a house, or they own their home. And also we ask about their ability to pay mortgage, or if they were looking for some type of help. Broadband access and computer use, what kind of devices, the quality of internet, and other questions. And then placemaking, where we included questions related to the community public spaces. The next category is developing leadership at civic engagement. That includes community leadership, where survey participants rated the leadership in their community. Civic engagement gave an opportunity for respondents to to indicate their trust in people and institutions in their community, their volunteering activities, and also tell us more about their group and club and like interest, hobby and hobbies participation. Promoting community health and wellness includes community food security and insecurity, and especially insecurity was or includes a lot of questions about hunger, about being able to have food the whole month, or where to find the help. If the respondents were able to find help, where did they look for help, and so on. Then we focused on substance misuse and use disorder, health status and health care, quality of life, satisfaction and well-being, which is related to the access to healthcare, to the existence of or accessibility of schools, culture, shopping centers. Satisfaction and well-being is about being happy, satisfaction with their own life, with the future goals, and what are the expectations and further steps. And then protecting the environment, it includes only 2 questions related to how the respondents are concerned about the changes in climate and pollution. So as I mentioned, we use a lot of resources. This is part of them. If someone is interested, please feel free to ask for those resources, or send an email. We can provide you with this list. So what we did next, after preparing the long list of questions, we had to specify our sample. As we focus on households, we distinguish between non-family and family households, and based on the publicly available statistics and the ratio between non-family and family households, we decided to have 36% of households as non-family and 64 as a family households. Then we were looking for the share of urban and rural households. So we have 70% households located in urban areas and 30% in rural areas, which is, this ratio is based on first US Census Bureau household distribution, and also on the NCR-CRD rural urban definition. And then we were looking on race and ethnicity, and again based on the national data published by US Census Bureau, we defined the minimum quotas as you can see, 8% Black and Hispanic, 2% American Indians and Alaska Native, 3% Asian, 87 means white and other races, and we further distinguish between white and other races. After specifying our quotas and screening questions, we contacted the Qualtrics company and agreed on the survey distribution and employment that we developed, and also discussed a lot of things about how to gather data, how to implement the quotas, and other things. So the main issue was at the beginning how to collect data, which means what method to use, because our quotas were pretty specific and it's not always easy to get to the householders to get the relevant responses and to find the households that fit our quotas. As a result, Qualtrics company employed two data collection methods. One was standard online survey using Qualtrics questionnaire that we developed, and we asked for 417 households in 9 states of North Central region: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Ohio, and Wisconsin. The remaining 3 states were a different story, because Qualtrics made us clear that it was not going to be easy to reach all the households we require, and suggested to use not only online version, but also computer-assisted telephone interviewing, the abbreviation CATI. So we agreed, and what they did was that they put they distributed the survey online, and the remaining household, or the household that that still were missing, were contacted via CATI to make our sample completed. And as you can see, especially Dakotas, North and South Dakota, were best efforts online, but most of the surveys were made by the computer-assisted telephone interviewing, which on the other side made our the responses easier in terms that we immediately, or Qualtrics got immediately the correct answers. So altogether, our sample was 4,133 households. That was the required number. And we also got more than 500 additional households because Qualtrics collected a lot of family households responses, which was great, but we were still missing non-family households responses, because non-family households are more difficult to reach, because there are less households, non-family households in each state, and also they were simply more difficult to reach. So Qualtrics had to add the non-family households to our sample, and we also received the higher number of family households as an additional sample. So at the end, we have 4,668 households with that completed the survey, and that are all those surveys and answers are included in our final data set that is available to you. This is an example of screening questions and also the codebook that is also included in the bundle that is available for you. You can see how our questions look like. The coding is made with the intention to use Excel or Stata or other statistical software that enables you to make different analysis, statistical analysis and models to get results that you want. On this map of Midwest, you can see the respondents distributions. There are differences between states. For example, Iowa and Minnesota was a little bit below our required 417 households because it was really difficult to fill the non-family households quota. On the other side, other states were oversampled, and we have our required households from North, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Respondents by state and household type, and it's here the same as in case of this this chart. In the title, the number of responses is less than the final sample. The N is number of responses is 4,232. This is because the answers the answers were not mandatory except the screening questions. So respondents were allowed to refuse to respond in terms of their state. It corresponds with our IRB protocol and keep the anonymity and also volunteering on the survey. So only if the respondents didn't answer the screening questions, at that moment they were kicked off or excluded from the survey. Otherwise, they were allowed to refuse to answer. So we do not have states for each respondent. We have the respond for we have states related to 4,232 respondents. And as you can see, we are almost filled the quota, but still most of the states, the share of non-family household is lower than we required, but we are good with this share. Rural urban locations, we are good with quota. Again, because of the state distribution, we do not have the full sample, and most of the states have the respondents from up to 30% respondents from rural locations. Finally, respondents by state, race, and Hispanic origin. Of course, based on our quotas and the population distribution, the highest share were white respondents, but we have also a big share of Hispanic origin respondents, Asian and Black respondents. Qualtrics did their best to get responses from American Indians and Alaska Natives as well. And we even have a couple of Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders respondents. 2 or more races include different answers that you can find in a text form in the survey, in the database available for you. And despite I am a slow speaker, I am at the end of my part, and I will pass the presentation to Maria to continue where you can find the database and what the center does with all the data we have.
Thanks, Susanna. So let me start with the first place you can go to find the data set, and that is to go to our website and then just click the button there that's circled that says, that purple button that says NCR-Stat Baseline Data, and that'll take you actually to the Purdue University Research Repository. There you'll find that the data has a DOI for you to use as a citation, and you'll be able to download the bundle, which includes the codebook. And you've seen an example that Susanna showed you of the screener. All the codebook looks like that. We tried to make it as clean and as easy for you to use as possible for that codebook. So it all looks the same. It matches with the Excel spreadsheet data for you to be able to use. And so you can go, that bundle includes the codebook, it includes the technical information on rural urban definitions, and of course the Excel spreadsheet. And so that is there for you to use with the citation. And obviously what we want you to do is go and immediately go download the data for you to use. And of course, if you have any questions, you should always feel free to email Susanna and myself regarding the data set or anything that's in the data set. We had some students working with the data. We know that maybe not everybody wants to go in and get the Excel spreadsheet and use the data. And so oops, I went too far. So one of the things that we did is have students work on the data. So what are the things that the center is doing with the data? Well, we're doing some data snapshots. That is, not everybody might want to go in and work with the data, but you might want the information that's there. So what we're doing is just kind of basic descriptive statistics, some inferential statistics, some cross tabulations. So maybe rural, urban, and race and ethnicity, dividing some of these variables by gender, by race, ethnicity, by location, so that if you're just interested in, for example, health status, so our first 3 are related to health insurance, health coverage. If you're interested in those, you can just download those or look and read those and get some information about what's going on in the North Central region and by state as well. And those we publish usually one a month at least. And you'll see them. If you got our newsletter today, you got some on our newsletter as well. So that's some of the things that we're doing, all of it to make this data as accessible as possible for you. And as I said, we also had some student workers, some of our graduate students working with the data, and we let them choose the topics that, obviously there's a lot in there. So we said, what is interesting to you that you would like to do some data snapshots to entice people to use the data? And so here I'm just going to give you a brief description of some of the things that they've shown that maybe, piques your interest. So one of them is use the question, the share of respondents that personally experienced discrimination in their community in the last 12 months, which obviously that's part of our community, civic engagement and community. And so as you can see, almost pretty evenly distributed by race and ethnicity, the different, how people said that they had experienced discrimination in the last 12 months. So continuing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, these are perceptions of people's local community. And so here you see two charts, one on my left, it is my local community makes all residents feel welcomed. And again, here you'll see agree, strongly agree and agree or agree, strongly disagree and disagree or disagree, and then the neutral. And you can see how that's distributed by race as well. The second chart is my local community welcomes residents of all backgrounds to participate in local government and community decision making. And again, you can see the distribution. We can see that American Indian and Alaska Native are less likely to agree, have a higher proportion that don't agree on some of those, including those that are saying they're other races. Another work is continuing with diversity and inclusion as my local community provides equal employment opportunities to residents of all backgrounds. And you can see again the distribution of agree, neutral, and disagree. And here people with two or more races have a lower proportion that agree. The next chart is my local community provides equal access to housing for residents of all backgrounds. And again, it's by race. And you can see the differences across and the similarities across by race. Oops, one more. So the next one is on work environment. And sorry, not work environment. Students' work is by the environment. So to what extent climate change or global warming is an issue to be aware of? And you can see the distribution from a very great extent to a very little extent. So 31% said to a very great extent, and 12% said to a very little extent, to look at the extremes of one end and the other. And then continuing on, this was on environmental concern based on residential location. So this is based on our urban, suburban, and rural categories. And you can see that 30% said that environmental concern. So 30% of urban said that to a very great extent, 34% of suburban and 27% of rural residents said that to a very great extent, they have an environmental concern, and then on down the line to very little extent. So I guess this is basically just to give you a flavor of some of the questions, again, in a little bit more detail and what that looks like, and some of the things that you'll see on our website and on the newsletter in terms of the things that we pick out for people to be able to use the tables themselves and data without having to actually dig into the data if that's not something that someone wants to do. As the students would say, starting from scratch took them a bit to go. And so if somebody doesn't want to do that, this kind of provides you some of that information. And that is it in terms of the NCRC data set and kind of giving you an overview of what's there, what we hope you can gain from it. Again, if you have any questions, you should feel free to email us. And we are more than happy to answer any questions now. If you have any, you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. And Susanna, if you can take down the PowerPoint, we can then see people. Great, thanks. Questions, concerns, comments? Oh, yes, Ricardo.
Hi, so first off, I think the data is great. I had a question on slide 8, but I can just, you don't have to pull it up. It's about households that are in a town of less than 2,500 people, but that are perhaps part of a metropolitan statistical area. How would you qualify? How would you categorize those? As urban or as rural?
that's the reason why we simplify the question for the survey. Are you asking for the survey or in general?
I'm asking when you are presenting aggregates of summaries for rural and urban. I'm wondering where a household that is less than 2,500, that is in a town of less than 2,500 people, but that municipality is urban, whether that household will be considered as part of rural or as part of the urban group.
Good question, and this is the reason why we have two questions related to the household location. One is where participants are asked very specifically on the size of the town they live in terms of number of inhabitants, or if they live in the rural areas as an open space, which means they do not live in a city, but some remote farm or some remote area. And then they have a question where they self-identify the place where their household is located, and there are three categories: urban, suburban, and rural. So if the town is like 2,500 inhabitants, it's a rural town. But if it is located close to the big city, it may be in suburban area. So this might be a little tricky, but we need to consider also these suburban locations because they are rural statistically, because the city is small, but based on commuting patterns and other statistical variables, and especially the location, it's suburban. So that's the reason why we have those two questions. But in the survey, we focus, if we want to distinguish between rural and urban, just have two categories, we consider the question with the specific answers related to the size of the city or town.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Shun Yu, you have your question, you have a hand up?
Yes, hi. So my name is Zheng Yuanzhu. I'm a professor of statistics from Iowa State University and the director for the Center for Survey Statistics Methodology. So we also do a lot of rural studies. There's a lack of data, so it's great to know that you guys make this data available in this region. Great work, and thanks for holding the webinar. So I have some specific question about that data set. So you have covered the 12 states, I think. 8 of them you only did the online survey, right? And 3 of them you did address-based survey, I think. Is that right?
Well, so 9 states had online only, and then 3, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota, we did online and CADI, which is the
telephone call. Okay.
Yeah, telephone assisted, yeah. Just to be able to make sure that some of those rural households would be harder to get, just online only.
So first of all, who is sponsoring this survey? And then also, why? Because when you use different modes, there could be some potential differences, right, between the online only and the why not having some of those states with both modes so that you can have some calibration?
So for the first question, who's sponsoring the survey? So the center is funded by USDA. So the center itself proposed that part of our funding will go to doing this data set, to provide it to you, because that's what we do. So that's who's, so I guess USDA NIFA is sponsoring your data. That's what we propose to do with the money that comes to us for the center, and that's who sponsors. And the reason our proposal first was to do everything online, but as we worked with Qualtrics, they were like, yo, rural households are really hard to get. Just online because of broadband and other issues. So for us to be able to get enough households for you, we're going to have to also use CADI. And so CADI is much more expensive, probably much more expensive than online. So those 3 states cost us as much as the other 9. And because of that, that's why we didn't use both. This just to be able to use to get our money's worth. If we used CADI in the other 12 states, it would have been just too much money for us to do. And yeah, probably not the best statistical in terms of, but I'll say, let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. That's what we could provide. And we wanted to have data on all 12 states. And so we didn't want to say, well, it's too expensive to do it just and not do the other 3. And so we did our best efforts, right? That's kind of how it ended up that way.
So just so the 3 states you have the CADI, the sample size is much smaller, right? Because of the cost, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
You also have the online part for those 3 states, or only have the CADI part?
We have both. We have online and CADI for those states. Yeah. Like I said, those 3 states cost as much as the other 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was really a cost constraint.
I see. Thanks.
Sure. Bruce, you have a question?
Yeah, my question goes back to slide 8, because different states or different areas use different terms. I noticed that we use city and town. And I just wanted to clarify, when you say a town, let's say of under 10,000 or 2,500 to 10,000, is that a township or is that a community? That's why I just wanted to double check on that. Because oftentimes we can use the word town in Minnesota for talking about a city that's 5,000, whereas township, is a geographical area that might, in our area, is like 6 miles by 6 miles.
This definitions are taken from U.S. Census Bureau and ERS, ERS, the abbreviation, Maria.
Economic Research Service.
Economic Research Service, thank you. And it always depends on the definition, but we didn't go into such details because it would be difficult for respondents to think whether they are township or city or town, because there are not clear definitions about what is town and what is city. So it's easier just to take their community, which means the place where they live, as a location, and they can identify, or they easily find out how many inhabitants live in the place where their household is located. So we are not talking about township, we are talking about town or cities, and we didn't specify it in more details. It's a good point. We might do it for the next survey. We might be more specific or in our own definition, but for now we stay with town or city or rural areas as an open areas. Did I answer your question, Bruce?
I think it's probably.
I think our thought process was that if it was like the population number distinguished it between being a town and a city, was our thought process, taking it from the senses of like, if it's small, it's a town, if it's big in a city, but it is really open. It's really open, I guess, to interpretation. I don't think when we were doing this, we were thinking of maybe somebody in Minnesota is thinking of a town instead of a township. That, like Susanna said, that might be something that we need to consider, is like, do we need to be putting definitions on what we mean?
Yeah, I know when I work with my colleagues in Wisconsin, because in Minnesota, we talk about a town and we're talking about, where you'll find stores and where you've got streets and laid out and in blocks of
Right.
people living together. We'll call that a town. But I know when I'm dealing with people in Wisconsin, I can't use the word town because they always use that. At least the people I was dealing with consider that township. And so, that's why I just kind of wondered about the language in there.
Yeah, so we were using it as the same way you would use town, but so our colleagues from Minnesota, I guess, be aware that we're using the definition of that town and maybe not your definition of township.
Yeah, and I understand it depends on the purpose of the survey. Having the survey as you did or Minnesota did, the accessibility, driving distance, and so on, it's important to be very specific where they go for shopping and all this stuff. So yeah, I understand what you mean, but we were not so specific in our survey right now.
And I think we have some questions in the chat.
Yes.
Oh, were you gonna, okay. I'll just read it out, Susanna, in case everybody's not reading it. As you're all exploring the data, are you seeing market differences or maybe only slight differences between rural and urban for attitudinal items? I realize it depends on the item, but just curious in general what you may be seeing. Thank you. That's from Mark Tucker.
Yes, we see differences between rural and urban. We didn't search all the topics we have, but as far as we know, for example, in health related questions and results, there are differences between rural and urban areas in terms of health status or problems paying medical bills or health insurance. Urban areas are always in a better shape than rural areas in terms of those health-related results and questions. In terms of income, age structure, also the age structure is different, more higher age or older people in rural areas and more lower income level households in rural areas. And I believe, for example, in the slide that Maria showed from the students' work, people in rural areas are less concerned in environmental issues. So there are differences. I believe there will be differences almost in each question. It depends on how big the difference is. So it varies, but there are definitely differences between rural and urban areas.
Yeah, and then there's two questions that I'll go ahead and answer related to our future data collection. One was whether it's going to be cross-sectional, longitudinal, and I would say a little bit of both. So our next survey, which is focused on caregiving, as I said, rather defined, that would be cross-sectional. There'll be some questions that might be similar to the ones in the baseline. And then our next kind of baseline would be more longitudinal and taking some of those questions. So taking a portion of questions and be able to make it not necessarily a panel data because it's not the same respondents, but you might be able to do, make it a panel. And then there was a question about cost. Yes, and I do know the total cost of collecting the data, which was $45,000 is what we spend on collecting the data. And yes, we plan on doing this every year. My goal is to do some portion of baseline every year, and then a theme-specific survey every year as well. So doing 2 data collections per year. So this was our first one. We've learned a lot in doing this and what it is that we need to do to make sure we're making it really accessible. And so, yeah, if you have, that's why I said, if you have themes or questions that you think you would like included, if you would like to oversample your particular state on specific themes or questions, you should contact us because it might be easier for you to just add on to our data collection versus going out on your own. So that was also the purpose of doing the data. So, for example, if those Nebraska and Dakota colleagues want to get more people online and want to, get more sample or any on any particular theme or anything, it's probably easier to add on to ours than to maybe go out on your own. So yeah, definitely, we are very open to meeting your needs on some of the data that needs to be collected for the North Central region. Oh yes, and Omar, I take your point that we should make sure we do let people know to be mindful about specific state definitions for things like for different things. Any other questions? We have a few minutes left for comments. If not, then I hope this encouraged you to at least go and take a look if you haven't done it already as we were speaking. Take a look on our data set, and we hope that you start using it. And again, if you have any questions, please let us know. We are more than happy to help you with anything related to the data. And if not, well then, happy holidays to all.